Thank you so much for being here this evening. I am excited that you are here. Tonight, you're going to see a missionary presentation. I want you to watch closely because tonight's presentation is brief, but I found it so powerful. I don't want you to miss a second. And I want you after that to think about what questions would you ask this missionary tonight because he's going to be available to answer your questions. And then when you put your comments in the question, if you're hosting a watch party, put them over into Worldwide's page or my personal Facebook page or on YouTube. Just post wherever you're watching on YouTube and we'll see the questions as well. But I want you to hear the interview tonight. I want you to get your questions answered. And in a moment, I'm going to show you Brother Colton Lee's presentation. I've seen it already. I watched it. I was impressed. And I know you'll be captivated.
Imagine that you only have one life to make a difference. And imagine that the God of the universe has told you to go and do that very thing that can change the world. Now stop imagining, because that's the reality. God has told us to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And that's exactly what my wife and I do through Project Everywhere. The heartbeat of Project Everywhere is to find unevangelized people and go and preach the gospel to them. I remember sitting under preaching as a teenager, hearing of when Jesus fed the 5,000 with just a little lad's lunch. There was nothing special about the lad or his lunch, but when it was given to Christ, it was used to change the lives of thousands. It was at that moment that God called me to surrender my life and preach the gospel. Places all across the globe remain untouched with the gospel, and by God's grace, I intend to go and preach Christ crucified and risen from the dead.
I can remember a conversation I had with an individual after I told them I wanted to go into full-time ministry. That individual asked me when I was going to give up on that dream. I realized then that I would rather die than pursue a life not serving Christ. Later, when I was talking to my dad, I told him through tears that I could do nothing else than go everywhere and share the gospel.
We all have just one life to give to Christ. And while billions remain untold, we refuse to sit by and do nothing. We will go everywhere and preach the gospel.
Thank you so much, Brother Colton. Like I told you, viewers, that's powerful. It's impactful. Brother Colton Lee, when did you know you could do nothing else but Project Everywhere?
Yeah, I think the moment that I'd point back to when God made it so clear in my heart that He wanted me to be a missionary evangelist to unreached people groups was when I was in Bible college, and I was on my bed trying to go to sleep, struggling with what God wanted me to do with His call in my life as an evangelist and what that meant for me. And it was just so clear in my heart that God wanted me to find unevangelized people groups and go and preach the gospel to them. So I surrendered. And I remember just that moment of when I said yes to God's will, that there was just that abiding peace, that assurance of God's direction in my life.
Mm. What is it like to have a burden from God to preach the gospel?
Yeah, to have a burden for God, the best way that I could describe it would be a continual reminder that God has
Mm,
placed upon you a personal responsibility for seeing to it that lost people hear the gospel.
mm. And when you look ahead 10 years and you dream about what your ministry is going to be, what's that going to look like?
My dream in 10 years would be to to look back on a life where my wife and I have had the opportunity to be in thousands of unreached villages and with unreached people groups all over the globe, from North Madagascar to North and South India to the many islands in
Mm.
the Pacific, that we have good men in the uttermost on some of them, but many of them are just untouched with the gospel. By God's grace, I intend to go there and preach Christ crucified and risen from the dead. And looking back for 10 or looking forward 10 years from now, my hope is that would have been a life where we went to lost places where there were people
Mm.
that never heard the name of Christ, hear Christ proclaimed.
Yes. Brother Colton, I watched your video. I saw it. And it made me ask this question. Why were you not content just to give and occasionally pray?
Yeah, I think the problem with the idea of just giving money and occasionally praying about missionaries and missions is that's just not all that Jesus asked his disciples to do. Jesus wants his disciples to have a very real part in going and helping lost people understand the gospel. And I think that if we just answer that question with, well, I give and I pray,
Mm.
but I don't share the gospel and proclaim Christ, I really think that we're not fully obeying what Christ has commanded his disciples to do.
Mm. And there is nothing wrong. As a president of the mission, I thrill when people pray and give. It's the sole solution to the lack of laborers in the world. But there's something more. And when I watched your video, it made me realize you weren't content with that. What took place in your life that gave you this vision and this passion to do Project Everywhere?
Yeah, Brother O'Malley, this really is a huge question. There's a lot that could be said in it, but just to sum it up as briefly as I can, I came to the end of myself. And I saw
Mm.
that in Jesus, there's real hope and purpose. And when I felt that Jesus was calling me, was telling me to go, I couldn't get over that feeling of awe.
Mm.
I'm nothing special. I'm not a somebody in my mind. And when Jesus, who rescued me, told me to go and bring the hope of the gospel that so changed my life, uh, I couldn't do anything but obey it. I felt like that was the
Mm.
only thing that would make sense. And I think living a life where you're obedient to the Lord, that's certainly a life that's worth living. And what Jesus has done in my life has given me a vision and a passion to see that happen in other people's lives.
Mm. Brother Colton, I'm going to encourage, I'm already getting questions in the viewer box, and I want to make sure everybody gets their question in tonight so we can take the time to answer. But Colton, I've known you through your college experience. We are close. I was supposed to be in your wedding, but I came up with the excuse of open heart surgery as if that was enough, and I missed the wedding. But I've watched you. I've seen you through your college experience. I love Melody. She was the upgrade to your life that you needed for sure, and a huge fan of Melody. But I can see this when I watch your video. I wrote this question after I watched your video because I thought I want to ask Colton some really hard questions, or at least penetrating questions. It's like, to me, you're moved with compassion like Christ was. And you see people who are scattered, and you see people who have no shepherd, and you see people who have no hope and no direction and no opportunity and no one to come to them. But do you really expect people to respond to the gospel who've never heard? And if so, tell me why.
Well, the short answer, absolutely yes. I do expect people to respond to the gospel because there's actual hope in the gospel message. And this can't be overstated. The fact that God in the flesh came, lived a perfect life among us, a life that we could not, died in my place, was buried, rose again, conquering death, and offering new life to me and to all who
Mhm.
believe, who just simply turn and trust him. Well, that's a message of hope, of redemption, of
Yes.
reconciliation and grace, and certainly a message that I believe that lost people will respond to.
Mm. You know, it's clear you and Melody, if anything, are resolved, right? Melody said, and these were such powerful words. I still see her image on my face and in my mind. On my face, that didn't come out right. I see her image in my mind. I see her face in my mind. And she said she would rather die than not go and tell everyone. You said you're giving your life to this cause. How does one find such resolve?
Well, before I answer that, I certainly do want to mention that I am incredibly blessed that God has given me such an awesome wife as Melody, and one who shares the resolve as I do. And I think the simplest way to answer your question is to uh, mirror, or to say, as the Apostle Paul said, that the love of Christ constrains us. And the Apostle Paul, when he in 2 Corinthians 5:14 and 15, he rehearses the gospel. He says, "For the love of Christ constraineth us, because we thus judge that if one died for all, then we're all dead, and that he died for all, that they which live should not henceforth live any more unto themselves, but unto him which died for them and rose again." The simplest way I can answer that question is Melody and I both are resolved because the love of Christ constrains us to live for Christ.
Mm, that's so powerful. I'm thinking of dozens of young people who are watching tonight. And I'm thinking about youth pastors who are watching, and both of you came out of homes and you ended up in Bible college and separate Bible colleges, and God ordered the steps of your life to bring the two of you together. And I think about you, and I've watched you with young people. We've been together in churches, and I've seen them, and you have a heart or a passion for young people. And that's an important detail to me when I'm dealing with people in ministry. Don't ignore our young people. And I realize this: you have but one life to give for God. Can you be content? And keep in mind who's listening now, but can you be content with missionary service as your life's purpose? And before you answer, keep in mind there are parents in our independent Baptist churches who think that missionary service is something that is like the worst thing ever to choose. There are parents who are well meaning who have said, I didn't raise my kid for him to go off to some far flung place to raise my grandbabies in a place where they don't even speak English. And how on earth are we going to be able to visit our grandbabies when they are on a mission field somewhere? So when I ask you, you have one life to give for God, can you be content with missionary service as your life's purpose? Keep in mind those people and speak to both.
Yeah, there's a number of different things that I think need to be addressed. Well, part of it is the need, and though we certainly have different things that we want in this life, I think none of them in any way amount to the need for lost people to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's far more important than any possible thing that I could want on this earth. It's far more important than a big house and a new car and a big bank account. It doesn't even compare at all. So the need to go is so huge. And if God is burdening anyone's heart who's listening, that He wants you to go, you need to surrender and go. And at times it might not make sense financially or anything like that, but man, God has proven in my life time and time again that He can do incredible things. But to answer your question, you ask, it's so significant because it deals with purpose. And Mel and I find great purpose and meaning in what God has called us to do. And I know that what we've committed to do will not be easy, but really there's no walk of life where it is just roses the whole way. I mean, there's difficulty everywhere in life, but we're convinced that we're doing what God has told us to do. And the most fulfilling life is the one that God directs. Meanwhile, the most unfulfilled life and the most discontent ones are self-directed. I've seen people who pursued money and got it, and they weren't satisfied. And I've seen it in multiple cases. And I thank the Lord for the examples that I could see of that, and at an early age see that, man, that people are getting what they want, but they're not happy. They're not satisfied. They're not content. But I found that
Right.
contentment and satisfaction, real contentment, was found when you obey and yield and surrender to God. And there's nothing better than
Yes.
living a life where you know that God is glorified and pleased with your choices. But no amount of money or anything could be traded for that, and it be a worthy trade.
Mm. I know there are youth pastors who watch. They watch every time, and I've even sent a few of them other videos from other missionaries different nights. And I want you youth pastors to grab a hold of what Brother Colton and Melodie's age and their submission to God's will. And if you're a parent tonight and you're watching and you're thinking, well, Brother O'Malley kind of squealed on me here. I feel it, but I don't say it. I don't want my kid to really go. I'm a parent, and I can tell you this: I want my kid to do what God wants more than anything. And it doesn't matter if God wants him to work on the mission field in a church or in Chick-fil-A. It doesn't matter to me. I just want them to do what God wants. And not all of our kids are meant to go and serve. But God help you, parents, and listen carefully. If you restrain them from doing God's will, how are you going to be able to live with yourself? I know that's very direct and very personal, and I generally don't make comment during this time, but I was so moved by Colton and Melodie's presentation. I want you to think about this. What are you doing? You've watched all of these videos night after night and week after week. And yes, they're wonderful to see and they're stirring and it's pleasant. But what are you going to do? What are you going to do? And Brother Colton and conveyed a melody as well, how proud we are in this Christian sense, in the right sense, quite pleased of how the Lord is directing in your lives and your submission. Well, now I'm going to be in a lot of trouble if I don't get to some of these questions, Colton. So keep putting your questions in, and my list of questions keep growing on the side of my screen. So I promise I'm going to get to them. First question, Miss Pamela Turner, my dear friend down in Ocala, Florida. When do you plan to go, and which people group are you going to start with?
That's a great question, and part of because of the uniqueness of our mission field, where it's not exactly one place that we go and we
Right.
buy a house and we be among the people and stay there for years at a time. Although, should in the future God direct us to stay with a people group for months to several years, we by no means want to limit the Lord's direction in that. But because of the uniqueness of our ministry, we're able to kind of incrementally be on some mission fields, as well as come back and raise support and go back and forth. As the support increases, we're able to then to be more full-time on the field. But some of the trips we've already been able to be on. When I say we, recently married, so now it will be we. It was just I.
The
Trip
new we, the upgraded I to a we. Yes.
So the Lord's opened up opportunities with trips that I have taken in the past to help in the Solomon Islands, to help in some other places in the Pacific like Yap and Fiji, North Madagascar and India. But as far as in the future to come, this December and January, the Lord's opened up an opportunity to work with a missionary who's already in the Solomon Islands, Michael Dietrich, and we'll be taking a trip to what's called the Western Province, which is west of Guadalcanal, where he's at, where there's no Baptists or really gospel work that we're familiar with in that part that we'll be at. But then also there's work back in North Madagascar that we, as soon as we can, want to go right back to and disciple those who had gotten saved the last time and baptize them and by God's grace establish a church there in that village. And then there's other villages that while we were trying to get to that village, Andronamavu, that we passed that had, from our understanding, no one else trying to reach out to them. So we'd like to pass through them again. That's in North Madagascar. And then there's a pastor friend in South India that he's burdened about a village chain of about 200 villages that he's only been able to get into about 3 of them. And we'd like to work with him and that church there to base out of that church and further those ministries. So there's a number of different places all over the world. And it seems like I'm talking to different missionaries all the time that say, hey, I'm in this spot in the uttermost, but man, there's these 4 places around me that that God's just breaking my heart about. And I'd really like to have a guy like you come and we can go and do some of these trips and try to outreach and further that ministry there. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. I'm sure it does for Miss Pam as well. And I know you'll get in the comments and follow up on some of these questions. But Brother Colton is a pioneer. That's what he's doing. He goes and he finds these places and he comes back and says, I found a people group that needs to hear about Christ, and he helps tell the story back here. Becky Stahlcup asks, will you have to learn many different languages? And are you hoping to plant a church among the new believers so they get grounded in the word?
Yeah. So, or yes, the answer to both of those would be yes. Lord, or by God's grace, a lot of several of the languages that I've been exposed to have been, I don't want to say easy coming, but I've been able to be fluent fairly easy with American Sign as well as Solomon Island Pidgin. And our post-debutation goal for my wife and I is to learn French and Spanish. With English, French, and Spanish, there's really a lot of places in the world that would open up for us to be able to go and preach the gospel to, but also that would open up for us to go places where maybe they don't speak English, French, or Spanish, but an interpreter would speak one of those three. So a lot of different places we're preparing to bring an interpreter with us, but then also places where that might not be necessary. Case in point, in the Pacific, there are many islands that they speak English, and it's clear enough where we'll be able to speak to them in English. And if it is a matter where we have to learn a language, we have nothing against that, and fully well intend to.
Good. And Michelle Tao, who lives in British Columbia, says, will you have a home base? And if so, where? Where does Project Everywhere going to live?
Yeah, so we are just super blessed, and you can coin that, and it's just super blessed with
Hashtag super
a
blessed.
church. Yeah, right, there you go. Hashtag Project Everywhere, hashtag super blessed. We have a sending church called Tri-State Bible Baptist Church in Chesterfield, New Hampshire, and we want to we base out of there, our sending church, and we intend, unless God moves us, to stay there and to base out of there, and to have a house there that we come back to, and in between trips, and minister through that church and help that church when we're not overseas.
Good. And Belinda Brown is saying, how will you get preaching appointments? Are you working with other missionaries to find needed location? Now, that's somebody who really listened to the video. So good job there, Belinda. Shout out for you.
Yeah, and make sure I answer this correctly. It just seems
How,
like. Go ahead.
I'll give it to you. How will you get preaching appointments? And are you working with other missionaries to find the needed locations? Kind of a two-parter there. I didn't mean to blur over that.
So some of it's a little bit of both. So probably about half of the future trips that are planned on paper, in a notebook and in concept, not really purchased yet. Half of them are with missionaries who say, "Hey, would you come with me and we can do this?" And then probably half of them are missionaries said, "Hey, there's this island near my island that is unreached. The door's open, so, put that on your radar and go there." So a lot of it is connections from different missionaries saying, I'm in this place that is unreached, but there's other places around me, and we could go together. So it's probably about even, but my intention is for trips to be really more team oriented, and there's some safety aspects with that, and also just some practical aspects of having a team of about 4 people go. They'll be able to carry material that is needed, and 4 or 5 is a good number where you can all fit inside of a Jeep and not have to get 2.
There you go. Nora Dietrich, I think you know who she is. It's what would that be? Probably about 10:30 in the morning out there in the Solomon Islands. Nora Dietrich asks, how receptive have churches been to the concept of Project Everywhere?
It's kind of hit or miss. Some of it's incredibly positive, and I'll have some guys that'll say, "Wow, that's we need something like that. We really need more of that." And just because of it being kind of a different type of ministry, it sometimes is not as popular. And what I mean by that, and I don't mean this in any way coming off rude towards anyone, but God's called me to be an evangelist, and I think in America we've defined that one way, which it's not wrong by any means to do what American evangelists do. I've been blessed by their ministry, and they're traveling and preaching the gospel around the country, and we need more of them. But I think that it's a dangerous thing if we just box in, that's what an evangelist is exclusively. And sometimes when you present a different view that uh, just maybe different than what we're used to and comfortable with, naturally there's a resistance to that. But it's probably about 50-50 if that answers your question.
I'm sure it does. And if not, that you can get with Mrs. Dietrich in the comment section as well. What's one of the best memories that you've had so far from your trips?
Yeah, one of them that will never leave me. We were a team, myself, Jeremiah Clark, Kevin Carr, Pastor Ernest, who is a national Malagasy man in Madagascar, and then also there's a trip that Pastor Norm Johnson was supposed to be on. We got to the village in Anjanamavu, and we began preaching in the village, preaching in the marketplace, passing out gospel literature, announcing that we were going to have what's called the Jesus film. We were inviting people in French to come and watch this cinema, which is a several-hour presentation of the Jesus film. And a gentleman who owned a market front or like a storefront, he came to the group, and through the interpreter, he said, "My wife and I came to this village 10 years ago, and we saw that there was much confusion about who God is. And
Mm.
there was just all these different groups teaching all these different things about God. And we just saw there was so much confusion. So my wife and I began to pray. And we began to pray
Mm.
that God would send someone to clear up the confusion. So he said, would you and your group come to my house every night that you're here? And would you clear up the confusion and tell us who God is?" And each night
Oh.
that I was with, we were able to go through the gospel and explain to them who God is, go through creation, go through fall, go through the redemptive plan of Christ. And it was the last night as I was sharing the gospel, everyone in the group took turns. And the interpreter, he turned to me and he said, "They're ready. Now call for decision." So I just simply asked, I said, it's not enough just to know these things. You need to choose and believe and trust Jesus. And I said, "Who would like to do that?" And it was kind of quiet, and you had to go through the interpreter, and they had to think about it. And then the man who came up to the group, the father of the family that we were sitting with, he raised his hand, and through the interpreter, he said, "I'd like to pray and receive Christ and make him my savior." So in Malagasy, he prayed before us. And then I asked who else, and then his brothers in the house that also had been coming to the meetings, the little house, Bible study meetings. They one after
Right.
another they raised their hand, and through the interpreter, aloud prayed and received Christ. And then I kept asking, and the different people in the family kept responding. And it went from his wife to his daughters to his son, and all the different people in his family at that night prayed and received Christ. And I'll never forget it for this reason, that I don't think it's just one village in the middle of Madagascar where someone is praying that God would send someone to clear up the confusion. And maybe praying for 10, 15, 20, 30 years, I believe there's places all over the world where someone
Mhm.
looks around and they see all the answers with no biblical support and just people saying different things. And they say,
Yeah.
"God, would you send someone to just
Mm.
clear up the confusion?" I think
Yeah.
all over the world, people are praying that, and it takes us as disciples, as believers, to go.
Mm. Colton, thank you. Thank you for answering this question because it really is vital to understand. While your ministry may not be readily grasped, he's going to a country, he's doing this project, like printing Bibles or doing this meeting, but your goal is like the in the old days with evangelists where the man came to town first before the evangelist came to town and kind of got everything ready. And that's you. I see that as you. You're the guy who says, "I'll go find that village and then I'll come back and I'll tell people and I'll listen to the missionary who might not be at the uttermost, but he can see the uttermost from his front door." And you go there and you get the gospel to those people. And I'm so thrilled with what you've done. I want you to know there are more questions I didn't get to tonight, but I want you to know this tonight. I clearly learned about your faith, and I learned about your walk with God, and I learned about the places to which He's called you. And I want to thank you for being with me tonight, Colton. And viewers, thank you. Thank you for joining me tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow night for the last evening of our conference. Now, I sure have enjoyed this time with you. And at this last conference, we have a special finale planned for tomorrow night. And I don't want you to miss it. In fact, I'm going to ask you to look at worldwide social media pages and my social media pages for a special graphic to share, a post to share with everybody, because tomorrow night will be a presentation not like you've seen thus far. It will be completely different. There will be a presentation, but it's one that I can't wait for you to see. And I don't want you to miss it. So please plan to join me tomorrow night. So from Worldwide New Testament Baptist Missions in Kings Mountain, I say to you, good night.